After 34 years, there is a major breakthrough in a case that loomed over the Austin community and most importantly left the family of 4 girls killed at a yogurt shop in 1991 with questions. Today, investigators provided some answers. They say they linked one man, Robert Brashears, to the infamous crime through DNA testing and ballistic evidence. KXAN's Avery Travis is here this afternoon to explain the decades of work that went into finally learning this man's name. Avery, welcome and thanks for being with us.
Of course. Well, thank you.
So we learned so much today. This news conference spanned almost an hour and a half earlier today, but what stood out to you in all of that?
You know, after years of technological advances, truly dogged police and investigatory work, and then of course it can't be understated, families who were refusing to let this case sit stale, the lead detective really explained today it was actually Amy Ayers, the youngest victim's final moments 3 decades ago, that ultimately helped investigators solve this case because she fought back. DNA from under her fingernails was key in connecting Brashears to this infamous crime. Now, he's a man who police say is also responsible, they believe, for many other murders and violent assaults over the years. Those cases were also key in this breakthrough in the yogurt shop murders today. Now, for years, we have known investigators have been desperately working to identify an unknown man placed at the scene by DNA evidence that's known as a YSTR or Y profile, you'll hear them refer it to. Fast forward to this summer. Detective Jackson, who had taken over the case just a few years ago, determined that some evidence from one of the guns used, a .380, had not been submitted in years to a national network of ballistics data. They got a hit to an unsolved crime from the 90s in Kentucky.
Let's focus on that for a minute. So investigators today did not reveal many specific details about that Kentucky case, but they did tell us what they learned from it exactly.
Right. Well, they say it really shares a similar MO to what was going on in the yogurt shop murders. They then circled back to the DNA because they are not just taking one piece of any evidence to try to solve this case. So Austin detectives essentially did a research of some DNA that they had actually done back in 2018. But as we know, and detectives reiterated today, the technology is just getting better and better. More people are being submitted to these databases. Now, this time, a lab out of South Carolina got a match to a 1990 sexual assault and murder out of Greenville. And after 2 long weeks of waiting, and these detectives are just sitting and hoping that they're going to get this confirmation. The lab wanted to be really sure, that's why it took so long. Detective Jackson said he finally learned the name of the man who they described as a, quote, perfect match in the yogurt shop murders case.
I think it was 2.5 million to 1, which is essentially perfect in this case. But did their investigation really stop there?
No, if you can believe it, after all this, and there's so much more that we're not getting into here, but they did tell us today they continued to do even more DNA testing, even as recently as this month, to be sure.
And talk to us too about what else they were able to look into.
Yeah, I actually want to play a bit from that detective because he describes some of the results of that additional DNA testing, if we can take a listen.
And this was going to be it. We were pushing all of our chips on the table with this. This was going to be the last shot effort with some of this DNA. But we were pretty confident with the technology and the circumstances that this was going to be pay dirt. One of the things we retested was Amy's fingernail clippings from the autopsy. They were able to get quite a bit of STR, probably get DNA out of Amy's fingernail clippings, and it was directly compared to Brashears' profile, and it matched so that it's 2.5 million to 1 that it's likely Robert Brashears underneath Amy's fingernails than it is to an unknown individual.
You know, investigators say there are even more similarities in the MO and some of the details in that South Carolina case, the Kentucky case, which we are still waiting to learn concrete details about that Kentucky case. But we know today that law enforcement detailed many sexual assaults, violent assaults, and murders throughout the 90s that they say Brashears never stood trial for. But Jackson today said that this conclusion in the yogurt shop murders case is something that just could not have happened until right now, here in 2025, given the timing of many of those other criminal investigations and the technology that we now have. So Investigators emphasize that the detective work is still not over. There still are some leads to follow, but they do believe Brashears acted alone and is responsible for this infamous crime here in Austin.
Well, Avery is not going to be going too far. She's going to join us in our next half hour to talk a little bit more about what all was uncovered, because again, this is really just scratching the surface of this. But Avery, thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Will.
All right.